Good morning. This is Brian Spiro with IntelliChief, and I'd like to welcome everyone today to our webinar geared towards human resources professionals out there with the title, Asking You, Why Aren't Your Employee Files Electronic? I'm joined here by Sean Ryland, who is our product manager at IntelliChief. And today we're going to spend 30 minutes or maybe just a little over that, taking you through an introductory presentation on our IntelliChief solution and why you would want to consider IntelliChief in your human resources function and maybe specifically for electronic employee files. So I'll start us off with a little introduction, describe why you might want to consider that. I'll transition to Sean, who will do a little mini demonstration for us live, and then we'll wrap up with some announcements and questions and answers at the end. So for those of you familiar with GoToWebinar, you can submit questions into the GoToWebinar panel, and we can answer those at the end. And this session is being recorded as well, so if anyone in your organization wants to watch this, you can forward it to them, or if you want to rewatch it yourself, we can get you the link to the recorded version. So let's start off with just laying a foundational concept here. What I want to state for everyone on the call is that IntelliChief is not an HRIS system. IntelliChief is not an onboarding application or performance management solution. IntelliChief is an ECM solution, and what that stands for is Enterprise Content Management. So when you think about employee files being content, being documents, right, IntelliChief will let you store and manage those electronically. So if you take a step back and think about ECM technology in general, or if you're not familiar with it, it really brings a lot of different concepts to the table and a lot of different features and functions. And you see those here in this word mashup on the screen. Everything from scanning and document imaging to storage and retrieval of documents. There's workflow, there's integration to mobile, there's integration to your HRIS system as the system of record within your organization, of course. There's OCR and data capture, there's analytics and reporting. Right? Those are all the functions that an ECM solution should bring to the table, and that's what IntelliChief, the IntelliChief solution would bring to the table for you. So we're going to talk today about where you can use IntelliChief specifically to human resources, but the value of an ECM solution is that it's a solution that continues to get expanded throughout your organization. So maybe you start with IntelliChief in HR, but very commonly IntelliChief can be leveraged in accounts payable or the broader purchase-to-pay process, pulling in purchasing and receiving. You could use IntelliChief if you're a manufacturer or a distributor, for example, to process incoming customer orders and leverage IntelliChief through the broader order-to-cash process, touching customer service and shipping and accounts receivable. You think about contracts, you think about really any department within your organization or any business process within your organization that is document-based and maybe manual in the nature of processing those documents and that information. Those are all candidates for IntelliChief. So it can go beyond HR, but we're obviously going to focus in on HR today. So let's drill down a little bit. Why electronic employee files? Well, number one, HR functions are very document centric, right? Any employee who has been with you for a long time, there are a multitude of various document types and different versions, maybe annually, of the same document type that make up an employee's file. And so if I were to walk into any of your HR departments, the question becomes, are there file cabinets, right? Are you storing those files as paper documents? And most organizations are still. And beyond that, there's a lot of collaboration that might take place during the life cycle of these documents with an employee in your organization. So, if you think about the onboarding process and someone starts with your company and fills out a bunch of paperwork and that paperwork gets routed to different HR personnel, someone to handle benefits, you've got payroll, you've got maybe documents routed to other departmental people to be processed, maybe even employees request looking at information. You've got performance reviews that might make their way between HR and a department manager. So a lot of collaboration. And all this paper filing and all this touching obviously costs your organization both in dollars and time. And there's also a lot of risk that you're exposed to when you are filing these documents and handling them all, managing them as paper. And we'll talk about those. So just let's take a look at some numbers and maybe some other pain points through some studies that have been out there and published. And there's a lot of them, and you can Google and take a look at a lot of those documented challenges that industry analysts interview people like yourselves and document. But first and foremost, there's a lot more complexity today than there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago with regards to what you have to be compliant with and just administratively the requirements that you have to manage documents and, making sure your employee file is separate from medical and the I-9 has to be separate, and there's a whole process around that. So a lot more complexity and a lot more overhead on you for the administrative standpoint. And, a lot of HR departments feel the pain of not having enough resources, right? You run lean and mean. You have maybe a small team in your department. So there's a lack of dedicated resources internally on the business side. There might also be a lack of resources technically on the IT side to even support you. Lack of modern HR technology is a challenge, and the statistic, interestingly enough, whether or not you fit into this, but 85% of organizations categorized small to medium are strictly managing their HR function out of file cabinets, paper documents, spreadsheets. There's no formal HRIS application. And we have a customer here at IntelliChief that just deployed our solution in their HR function, and they fit that exact category. No HRIS system managing the data, and everything was paper-based. Some other numbers or statistics, organizations were asked, where is the paper usage within HR, right? You break the HR function down into a lot of different processes, recruiting, onboarding, just overall management of the employee file, all the way through to termination or separation at the end. Where is paper most heavily used in the statistics or the percentages for those processes? And, I ask you if you would agree with those or not, but we can see the varying percentages. And of course, the highest one is the overall employee file management, where 53% of those organizations surveyed here through Inc.com were completely paper-based. So the electronic employee file with IntelliChief, what does that look like? First off, I can't stress enough that IntelliChief, at the very least in this process, becomes your secure, centralized electronic employee file. It is not an HRIS system, as I said earlier, right? That is still your system of record, assuming you have one in place. And what we want to do, and depending on, there's the HRIS system, whether you're PeopleSoft, whether you're Infinium, whether you're Workday, ADP in the cloud, but there are not just HRIS systems, right? There are also other supporting applications that you might have for onboarding, for talent management, for performance management, and those all maybe are part of your HRIS suite or separate applications altogether. They all could possibly create and generate documents throughout an employee's lifecycle. And so we want to store those electronically, or you want to store those electronically in IntelliChief as that central repository. But in addition to that, you've got other employee files or other documents that make their way through HR that might be paper documents that get filled out by hand. And you're going to want to get those into IntelliChief. So you might end up scanning those. There might be documents that come into HR through email, whether that's an existing employee or someone you're onboarding before they start. They send you a bunch of onboarding paperwork that they filled out and scanned in as PDF and maybe send back to you. And you want to get those documents from email into the IntelliChief file linked to that employee. And maybe you've got other electronic forms out there, fillable PDFs, Word documents. Again, just another example of a type of document, category of document that could make its way into an employee's file paper-wise, and you want to get that electronically into IntelliChief. So we see here all these arrows, all these different sources of documents through an employee's lifecycle hitting IntelliChief. But it goes beyond that. It's also, we can now see arrows leaving IntelliChief and going back to the various HR applications that you might have. And why that is important is because from any application, HR application you have, you could set up the ability for one of your HR team members to be able to retrieve employee files from those applications. So it could be your HRIS system, which could be Lawson. You might have a different solution for onboarding, maybe Taleo, something else from performance management. And you can get at all those documents that those various systems generated by just opening your HR system and hitting a keystroke, which would launch IntelliChief and show all the documents that you're able to see, that you have the permissions to see with a single click right there from one spot. So very powerful. The advantages of IntelliChief, of course, at a high level, number one is security, right? You think about lost documents, you think about securing documents that are paper-based versus if you have them electronically. And not just who has access to the documents, but who has access to do certain things, who has certain permissions, who can view, who can email, who can redact, who can annotate, who can do all of these various functions, right? You get to lock that down so you have security in making sure that these documents are segregated as they need to be. And going back to that increased complexity around compliance and administration, right? Ensuring that your I-9s are kept separate, that your medical is not filed with the generic employee file type documents, right? So helping you conform to those rules that you're supposed to be conforming to, and mitigating the risk that's associated with a paper-based file. Right? You talk about lost documents, you talk about misfiled documents, you talk about stolen documents, but what about just from a business continuity and a disaster recovery scenario? You hear certainly a lot of disaster type stories out there of companies that have had challenges with destroyed documents, and you're not able to repeat or replicate those. And last but not least, the cost avoidance, right? The cost avoidance around just very simply storage, right? Just storage and retrieval, file space, just real estate space for storing documents, the time it takes for you to take your active employees and your separated employees and file them in different locations, and manage the retention policies of all these documents, again, so you're compliant, but there's also a cost associated with that. So increased security, compliance, of course, making sure you're compliant with what you need to, risk mitigation and cost savings, all advantages of the IntelliChief solution within HR. Other considerations before we pass things over to Sean that you might want to think about, those organizations that move from from paper files to electronic, you have to decide what to do with all the existing paper, right? All your go forward documents will be stored electronically, but are you going to backscan the paper that you have? Are you going to backscan just the active employees? Or are you going to backscan both the active and the separated employees? For that backscanning, are you going to take Sean's employee file? He's been with the company 20 years and has a 100-document employee file, right? Are you going to scan all of his back files as individual documents, or are you going to scan it as one big employee file? Something to consider. Who's going to do this backscanning, right? It's pretty important. It's not something maybe to be trusted with, some sort of intern. I mean, it's really something you would either manage yourself internally, or, you'd contract with a service who can either come on site, or you can send them these documents so that they get scanned properly and they get filed away in IntelliChief and indexed based on the core values that you need. So all considerations. Also analytics, right? It's very hard to report on paper files and what's missing and what's outstanding and what you have to work on. But when everything's electronic, that becomes a different story. So you can report on things like, a new employee who's been onboarded and what documents are deficient in their file. What haven't they turned into you yet that they need to, is a good example. And there's workflow, right? Once you have documents electronic, you can now put them automated through a workflow process, either within the HR function or between HR and other departments. Onboarding, performance reviews are good examples of those. Okay. So again, trying to keep it high level, give you that exposure to what the IntelliChief solution can bring to the table. And with that, I'm going to pass control, hopefully here, over to Sean. Sean, I'm making you the presenter, and you should have that in a second. And then you can give us a short demo of IntelliChief.
All right. Thank you, sir. I'll get into my environment here. Okay, and hello, everybody. This is Sean Ryland. As Brian said, I'm a product manager here at IntelliChief. So just like Brian said, I want to give you a quick overview of a few different things of how you might interact with IntelliChief and our solution from the HR perspective. Employee documents, employee files, whether that's simply importing them or capturing them into the system, retrieving them, searching for them, different ways that we might be of use to you. So this is the IntelliChief workbench, and so when a user logs in, this is what they're going to interact with for the most part. There are a few different tabs that we'll see with inbox and search, mostly how you access the documents. But we'll start with import and look at how we can get some documents in there. So from a structure standpoint, we reference document types by what we call a document processing profile. And we don't need to get into the weeds there, but we like to think there's more to it than just the document type. There's some security and how that document gets processed in the system that goes along with that document type. So I'm just going to, by default, say that I want to import some documents that are employment applications. But really, I can do several different documents at a time. And so I'll bring in this group of documents, give you a sense of what that would look like. And you see those thumbnails coming in at the bottom. Again, several different pages of documents, and these are actually different document types, or as I said, DPPs, document processing profiles. And so the first thing I want to do is identify where those breaks are. You can see there are these separator bars in between pages, and so I can first identify, you know what, these first 3 pages are actually this employment application. So I can leave that as the setting for that document processing profile. And by selecting that as my DPP, that of course identifies which index values are associated with that and which values I might be looking for, whether they're required, as you see with the asterisk, or if it's something that I can look up, if it's a date value, of course, different formats for the date. And so I can certainly type in some information here based on whose document this is, if there were information filled out in the document specifically. But what I really want to do is leverage the data I already have on file in my HRIS system. And so I can do a lookup directly to there, whether I have a blank field and just do a search directly based off of a blank field to pull that information back, or if I want to use that field as a search, and we can see that in another example. But by leveraging that database that we have already, then I can make sure that I have consistent data and also alleviate the manual process of entering or typing that information in there. So very quickly, I've identified whose this document is, whose document this is, excuse me, and I can move on to the next one. And so here I've got, this is actually the employment application, so I got ahead of myself. This other one, I would want to make that as my 401k, so shame on me for not looking at that, but obviously I can very quickly change that, and so you can see how simple that is to switch it over. So now I've got the employment application. I want to do the same thing. This time I'm going to type in a few characters to do that lookup, and so you can see instead it uses that as my search value and then immediately returns the additional data tied to that. Now the other thing, again, you want to do is identify where the separations are. So if I want to change this to a 3-page document, then I can very quickly do that, and now I've got a 3-page employment application. If we move over to direct deposit, then we can change that, identify it, and we could say that this is somebody else's in this case, and then import that document with a different user employee information record. And then finally, I've got a W-4, same thing. So depending on whose that is, I can bring that over. I can just go directly to the list of employees in file and then pull that information over. So very quickly, I can do that indexing, of course, with the data from the HRS system. Something else that we might want to do if you've got some, like Brian was talking about with backscanning, if you have several 100,000 documents that you want to bring in, whatever the case may be, you might want to apply some barcodes. We can read the barcode as well if you want to smack an employee ID on that barcode into these documents, maybe a sticker or a cover sheet. Then we can bring those in, and those will be read. The barcode will be read so that the system can use that data to do the lookup and populate that information from there. Another popular way that we can get the documents in is what we call print capture. So if you've got any documents that you have electronic, and here I've got a Word document of Beverly's resume. It could be a web page. So if you have a form that's pulled up, or if you've got a statement online, or something relating to that employee, credit report, or anything else that you want to capture as associated with that employee as part of the background search, perhaps, we can do a print capture. And what that does is the same as you would print to a physical printer. We can print directly to the repository and save it electronically. So you're not having to actually print it and then scan it back in. And so now if we pull in that as a print capture, we're going to get another pop-up window where I can do that indexing. And so I didn't really talk about it much on the previous documents with importing, but obviously associated with the DPP and those index values are, of course, what make the document unique and allow us to store and retrieve that document, as well as route it in workflow so we can get it to the right people if it's part of a process. So if this were onboarding, or if this were benefits enrollment, or there's some type of action that needs to take place when this document comes in, then we can have it routed to the right people based on the information, based on these index values in this data. And then also as well, as Brian mentioned with the reporting, then of course all of this data is available to report on. So if you want to get a snapshot of what you have in process or just on file, you can do that with this data. So again, I can do a quick lookup, pull back information to populate those index fields, and then save the document so that gets stored in the system as well. So jumping then back over to a couple different ways we can interact with the documents once they've been brought into the system. Here we have the inbox screen, and so these are documents that are in workflow, and we see on the left various inboxes that are essentially stages or queues, the different steps in the process. And of course, depending on who I am as a user logged into the system, I'm going to see different inboxes. So if I'm logged in right now as an HR supervisor, then I might have visibility to some other departments because I want to be able to track where things might be in the process. So I have some onboarding documents that need to be processed by IT or facilities, or perhaps even other departments like payroll. Then I want to have the awareness, or at least be able to track where those are as kind of a dashboard perspective. So with these inboxes, you can see each of them have a number next to those to show how many documents are in those inboxes. And when I have those selected, then it's going to display those documents as a list over here on the right, so I can easily access those documents. I'm going to refresh the screen, and we'll see those new documents that we brought in. Oh, I didn't actually forget. Sorry, I apologize, getting ahead of myself. I want to release these documents that we just brought in and add those to the batch. I was in too much of a hurry to jump to the resume. So those go into the system, and those will show up here as well. And what we've got set up essentially for the demo is I've got documents that are coming in from an onboarding perspective. And so any of these new documents that we bring in and capture, in this case for Beverly, I want to get those routed forward for additional processing. And so, like I said, depending on which inbox we're working from, you can see the name here. You can, of course, sort and filter these columns to rearrange or simply aggregate those documents in different ways. But to take action on the document, of course, I'm going to open that up. I see an image of the document, and then again, I've got the data over here associated with it. I have those thumbnails down below. But since it is in workflow, then I've got additional options that are presented to me. So I can, from a configuration perspective, I can present the user with a statement or a question that is very easy to understand so that they know what the action is expected of them. They can see the statement. They can select from this drop-down very specific options that, again, are natural language that you can configure as to how you want those presented. In this case, I'm asking the user, once they've identified this document, reviewed any of the data, make sure it's ready for additional processing, then they can move it on to the next step, wherever that may be. But we could certainly also, as I mentioned before, leverage the data that's on there. So if there's a certain department or a location associated with this employee, then maybe it needs to go to a very specific user, even within one of those departments. So even if I say, I want to send this over to payroll for review, especially if this was, say, a direct deposit or W-4, then maybe it's going to go to somebody specific within payroll based on that location. So you can, again, use that data to get it to this specific user who's going to take action on it. The other thing I might want to do, a couple other things, is when I'm looking at any document, I can very easily look at any other documents that are associated with this employee record. So, for example, if I'm looking at Beverly's employment application, we also see, well, hey, I also have her W-4, I've got her 401k, so I can show those related documents to see other documents that have something in common to that original document that I was looking for. So there's a lot of different uses for that as well, depending on which document you start with, how you might want to be able to easily access and retrieve other documents. And of course, any annotations. So if there's information I want to highlight or draw attention to on the document, just like I would with a piece of paper, then I want to do that here as well. It could also be a sticky note. So if you want to, very much like a Post-it note, put this on the paper and these are not changing the image. They're just a layer upon that image. So I'm not actually modifying the image itself. I can hide those or show those. And again, different ways of drawing attention by drawing lines or highlighting. We do also have, of course, a redaction tool. So if there's sensitive information on that document, we can redact it to make sure that it's not visible to users who should not have access to that. So again, that's all based on security. But as a user who does have the rights to hide any redactions or annotations, then I can see what's behind there. So again, all based on permissions for that user. So when I'm done reviewing the document, I want to route that forward in workflow based on the selection I've made. I can just confirm that, and that's going to push that forward. So again, just want to give you a quick glimpse of how you can interact with the documents. So that's the workflow perspective, accessing documents from inboxes and how we might process those going from one inbox to another, one department to another, but still having that visibility. And yes, of course, we do also have a common question. We have the ability to set somebody out of office so that things can automatically be routed to somebody else if they're not going to be able to do so in a timely manner. Searching for documents, if I want to retrieve documents very quickly, then of course I've got different ways of doing that based on the structure and the data associated with that document. Again, we've got the DPP, that document type that's tied to what that document is. We've got some levels above that. For example, the document class is a next level of grouping where it might be just a list of documents associated with a process. So maybe I'm just looking at benefits related documents, and that's going to filter this list of DPPs available down below. Same thing with up above with this data class. This is usually associated with a larger process or department. So if I'm filtering to just HR documents, then I'm going to see a shorter list of document classes as well as a shorter list of DPPs depending on the filters that I've selected up above. And of course, I can search based on just those, or I can then enter specific information down below. So for example, if I'm looking for documents for Beverly, I can do a wildcard with the asterisk and then filter from there. And like I said before, you can certainly sort and filter based off of these columns or do some rearranging. And you can save searches. You can make more advanced searches. Of course, you want to save time and do that on a regular basis. Then you're going to save that for easy access. One other way to retrieve documents, of course, is to be integrated with your HRIS system. So here I've got an employee record in JD Edwards. So I'm looking at the employee profile. So if your HR user is heads down and in the HRIS system throughout the day, they don't want to have to do a separate search over at IntelliChief to find the documents that are tied to this record. So if I'm looking at Carol's employee file and I want to see the documents that are associated with her record, I can just hit a keystroke to essentially do a search for me in IntelliChief. And you see behind the scenes that it pulled up the documents for Carol Frazier. And that might be based on her employee ID as it's presented on this screen. It could be her name. Just depends on what information we want to find associated with those documents so that we can retrieve those documents. So here I've got a dental form. I've got her direct deposit. I've got a disciplinary action, a performance review, drug screen, and then another direct deposit that we just captured in a little while ago. So obviously very easy to be able to get those documents if you're working out of your HRIS system. Just to be able to search for those very quickly is pretty handy. And then again, depending on what you find, maybe you want to dig down further with that related documents to find additional documents tied to that. So I know I covered a lot pretty quickly, but again, just want to give you an overview of different ways you can interact with the system, whether it's just searching for documents, interacting with workflow, doing some importing, printing. We have a lot of different ways outside of what I showed you, but these are some of the common things that you might see. So I'll pass that back over to Brian, and he'll wrap it up for us here. All right, let me see. Brian, you should have it.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, we're trying to keep these presentations 30 minutes, maybe just a little longer, just to give you a good feel, high-level appreciation for some of the things that are possible. So Sean just scratched the surface, as he said in that demo, and if it makes sense to engage and show you a more in-depth demonstration and talk specifically about how it could fit within your environment, we'd be very happy to do that. So trying to bring things to conclusion here, in talking about, why you might want to consider IntelliChief. Well, big picture wise, taking it back to my introduction, right? IntelliChief is a solution that's scalable for your entire organization all various back office and line of business functions that are document-based. So that's number one, right? It can go beyond HR. But with today's presentation, right, for you, it's going to offer not only a secure electronic employee file that's centralized, it's a centralized repository for you, but it has other functions in it beyond that. So even scalable within HR, you could start with just electronic employee file and roll out workflow automation for some of your different processes, onboarding, performance review, and so forth, as you grow into the system. So very scalable, but beyond HR. If you do engage with us further, you'll get a very good appreciation for who we are at IntelliChief. I'm sure a lot of vendors you speak with talk about their focus on customers and how customer focused they really are. But if you talk to our customers, they're going to really ring that true. Our customer base is firsthand able to talk to you about the level of support they get for our solution, which becomes mission critical within your organization. Electronic employee files, sales order processing, accounts payable, contracts, right? You're going to be dependent on the solution once it's implemented, and nothing other than exceptional support is going to suffice. And we bring that to the table. And we really focus in on a customer-driven development model. If you are requesting a new feature or function or think IntelliChief should do something that it's not doing, chances are, other customers feel that same way. And we have a very formal process in place to work with our customers to identify what these things are, make sure they get prioritization and into our development roadmap for the product that Sean actually manages. So we'd love to talk to you more about that. But features and functions are one part of the solution. Support that you have behind it is a totally other part of the solution that oftentimes goes underlooked in a lot of evaluations. So I think that from our standpoint here, we'll bring this session to conclusion. I'll review to see any questions in the submitted to GoToWebinar. My contact information is on the screen though, and we'd love to engage. So if you have any questions that you want to take offline, if you have some requirements you want to speak with us about, my contact information is there. Please reach out. I'll help you as best I can, or get you in touch with the right person at IntelliChief who can help you. We can always leverage Sean if we need to. So we'd love to engage if you are interested. So with that being said, the questions panel within the GoToWebinar console, feel free to submit some questions in there. I'll review those now. It looks like there are a couple of questions, so I will answer those in the meantime. And if no others come in, then we'll conclude the session. First question is asking if IntelliChief offers backscanning services. We do not offer those directly. We have a partner that we work with who we could put you in touch with, or if you've got a local company there who you want to deal with, that's perfectly fine. We do not offer those services though, but we would work with the party you contract with to ensure that they are getting us the electronic files in the right format we need, and all the index values that they get filed away on that Sean showed you earlier, that's all in the file format that we can bring in. So, but we can put you in touch with someone if you're looking for some guidance or direction. Another question in here, which is a common question, and it's still only the other question in here, is how long does it take to implement IntelliChief for human resources? If you're just doing an electronic employee file, it's a pretty low effort project. We spend some time up front with you on the consulting side, making sure that the file structure, the layouts, the separation of documents, best practices, right, all of that is built into your design, and then we implement it. So I think if I try and bring it back to the customer I was referencing earlier, I think start to finish, their project was just a few weeks. And, that included installation, testing, and so forth. So HR can be a pretty quick win for an electronic employee file. If you're going to get into workflow, then, the complexity of the processes and the rules and the routing is going to determine how much beyond that a project will take. Workflow is going to definitely add some complexity. So we would just need to know a little more, and I can probably give you a better answer. But electronic employee file, a few weeks, you should be up and running, all things being equal. And it does not look like there are any other questions submitted, so we will bring this session to conclusion. Again, thank you for your time today. The recording's available. If you want to share it with anyone else, just let us know. Otherwise, we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.